I'm Caroline Rosen. Thank you all so much for having me here today. Like Bill so graciously said, I'm the executive director of the Tales of the Cocktail Foundation. We are a 501c3 nonprofit in New Orleans. We are here to educate, support, and advance those in the global spirits and hospitality community. Tales of the Cocktail is an international spirits conference, and we attract over 30,000 people to New Orleans in mid-July. Yes, it is the hottest time of year, and the event brings in nearly a $20 million economic impact on our city in the slowest time of year. None of this gives me any right to talk about oysters, but in my past life, I was a partner in 2 restaurants in Montgomery, Alabama. I think I was one of the first restaurants to order Murder Point oysters in the state because of this gentleman right here. And I also ran a nonprofit, and I was able to give out microloans, and specifically microloans to oyster farmers. Marcos, it's so good to see you. So, enough about me. Before we jump in, I want to take a quick second, and I want to do a quick history lesson before we talk about branding. The Middle Ages were an unpleasant time. The food was very bad. The booze was very bad. And life was very bad except for the very few. Beer and wine were everywhere. Fermenting's easy. It's the distillation process that's complicated. As such, spirits were rare and almost were all called by the Roman name aquavitae, the water of life. It didn't matter if it was gin, rum, vodka, a combination of all of the above. It was aquavitae. In these dark days, there were limited advances in distilling, and most spirits needed to be blended together and with other ingredients to be drinkable. Punch was very popular in the 1700s and 1800s because you could mask the unpleasant flavors of distilled spirits with spices and citrus juices and water and any other compound you could put in there. Side note, punches are making a comeback. I believe that the punch is the communal table for the spirits world, just like a family meal, and I'll get off my soapbox, but y'all will be hearing more about punch from me. By the late 19th and early 20th century, methods had improved, aging was invented, and spirits became a part of everyday life. So this is a map of all of the distilleries in Scotland, and I know I didn't do a great job, but all those little dots on there you can see. About 2 centuries ago, whiskey distillation was made legal and subject to tax in the UK. At that time, there were 200 distilleries making spirits by the light of the moon to avoid the tax man, hence the name moonshine. Suddenly, there are now hundreds of legal producers ready to flood the market with their product, and they're now consistently better drinking options. But how do you know whether that whiskey you were getting was the sweet, sweet juice of the Scottish Highlands or some rot gut something from somewhere, no, not anywhere particular? And the answer is branding. Originally, your name was your brand. If you were willing to put your name on it, essentially your mark, then you were making a guarantee of the quality of your products. Think about names like Balvenie, Maclean, Oban, Talisker. As brands matured, their history became an important distinction. The longer you've been in business, the more history your brand has accrued, the better you must be. How else could a brand last that long unless it was good, right? I mean, 50 million Elvis fans can't be wrong. So early brands also embraced their location, providing not just appellation, but a sense of place. Wines from Burgundy shared more than a grape. They shared a terroir, just like many of the oyster people share a terroir. I hope I'm saying that right. Lord help me. The same is true of spirits, and the same is true of oysters. Can I go to the next one? Ta-da! Just like the map of the Scottish whiskey producers, the southern United States has a lot of oyster-producing areas. From Texas to Maryland, oysters are an important part of the fisheries of every southern state with a coastline. Here is a map of the oyster-producing regions of the South, and I'm sure this is incorrect, and y'all have many more to add, but this is what I could find on the internet. So take a minute and look at how many places can cultivate these wonderful, delicious creatures. But the same problem facing the Scottish whiskey makers faces oyster producers. How can the consumer know that they are getting a quality product? A product that was cared for, obsessed over, a product that is an attempt at perfection. And the answer is branding. The rest of this presentation will discuss some examples that have been used in the spirits world that will give you, hopefully, a better idea or spark an idea of how to make your brands work for your business. As we all sit around here today, we're all food insiders. We want to know where our food came from or comes from. We want to know who makes it. We want to know why our food is special. We can't forget, though, that we're still sadly in the minority out there. For most people, whiskey is still whiskey and an oyster is an oyster. And worst of all, we're in a field that this is craft, right? And craft has a stigma that you are literally paying more for less. It's your brand that overcomes the stigma of craft. Your brand is the reason that people choose you. And there are 5 lessons of why your brand is important. The first is why. You must give the consumer, and Julia was just talking about this, a why before they can choose your product. It's how you make the initial connection with the consumer and turn them from a curious person to a loyal customer. There are a few different sources of why. We're going to run through these real quick. It's family histories. I always like to bring up the Van Winkles. The brand Pappy Van Winkle is associated with the Van Winkle family and has been for generations. If you're out on the food circuit like we all are today, you can see Julian and Preston Van Winkle sampling, standing behind their product, and being a part of the greater community. It's a multi-generational family business. It's the best, and they stand behind it. Another way that you can get the why out there is the sense of history. I've got 2 dear friends, Scott Blackwell and Ann Marshall, and they really dove in deep because in the early days of the U.S., corn whiskey was made with a lot of different corns. With industrialized farming, which is a completely different presentation, many of those old corns died out. Scott Blackwell and Ann Marshall from Highwire Distillery in Charleston brought back an heirloom whiskey corn, Jimmy Red, and planted a whole field with it. It had literally gotten down to 2 ears of corn in the world. They used the corn to make a whiskey that would have tasted familiar to George Washington. Their belief in the whiskey history brought them to Jimmy Red corn, and this spirit just won Garden & Guns magazine's Best Product of the South. It is the first time a spirit has ever won this award. You know, the other why is a sense of place. So if you don't have the family lineage and you don't have the sense of history, you can find a sense of place, and an example of this is Herb Saint. Some spirits have to come from a certain place. In New Orleans, the most popular cocktail is the Sazerac. It is one of 14 cocktails that have been founded in New Orleans. We like to drink. And in New Orleans, the Sazerac is rye, bitters, simple syrup, and until 1934, absinthe. When absinthe was made illegal, I can't say the other word, so was Sazerac. Thus was born Herb Saint, a spirit that was meant to replace absinthe in New Orleans, the most popular cocktail. Herb Saint could come from nowhere else in the U.S., and it's that sense of place that keeps it stocked on the shelves in New Orleans. And then you also can have a sense of product. Some products are just unique, and you can make them unique in your own words. They're different. I'd like to talk about a gentleman named Simon Ford, a distiller friend of mine who has Ford's Gin, and he just released the Naval Reserve Strength Gin. It launched in New York last week. By overproofing his gin, he found a unique flavor profile that works great in mixed drinks. It is a very special gin, and he's claiming it's special, so that must make it special. He keeps repeating that it's special, and so that uniqueness gives it life. And back to what Julia was saying, know thy customer. Food, like spirits, is not a direct economy. Most customers don't buy their oysters directly from you, just as most drinkers should not buy their drinks directly from the producer. There's a middle stop first. For drinkers, it's a bar. For you, it's a restaurant or bar that serves oysters. The bartender in the spirits world is the best salesperson. Spirits companies know that even once they sell their product into the bar, there is a whole nother sales process that has to take place. You have to convince the bartender to sell your product. When someone says, I'm looking for a vodka, it's your job, if you were to say own Cathead, to make sure that the bartender recommends Cathead and not Tito's, which always go for Cathead instead of Tito's. And, one of the ways that you can have people, and I'd love to tell this story, is we were at Charleston Food and Wine, and I'll never forget it. I remember the day, walked up to my good friend Brian, he said, "Caroline, you have got to try this." I was like, "What? It's an oyster." And it was the first time I'd ever tried a Murder Point oyster, and it forever changed my life, and thank you for that. And y'all need to really love on these chefs because they are the best stewards of your product. So if you know that customer, if you know why you're doing it, you got to find a niche. Some spirits brands don't want to be the well product or a call product, but instead they want to be a certain type of cocktail or preparation that may not be used for everything, but is used in enough things to be viable as a business. Like the bitter orange liqueurs of Italy or Pimm's from the UK, it's unique flavor profiles that create niches. Do you have a flavor profile that plays nice with anise, tarragon, and thyme? If so, you have the perfect oyster for the absinthe revival bar. Do your oysters have buttery, briny flavors? Then champagne bars may be your niche. You can also look at branding for oysters for specific kitchen applications. Is your oyster great for ceviche, stews, frying? Find your niche and make that your market. And community. I went back and forth on whether to call this community or getting your ass out there, because it's the same thing. I don't mean making community by being in a silo, but you've got to get out there. When a new spirit launches, the big guys flood the markets with money and product until you can't avoid something. Do y'all remember Fireball? Uh-huh. Do you remember Firefly Sweet Tea Vodka? Uh-huh. Unfortunately, no one in here has that type of money to spend on it, so you can't do that. But what you can do is you can learn from them. I'm going to switch my page. You can use these techniques without spending a fortune. And there are three, I think that there, and take this for what it's worth, three real key areas where you can have an impact. The first one is guest chefs. Put an oyster farmer behind the oyster well where they can meet with the customers and talk about their product. Also get to know the restaurateurs and the people that are serving your products day in and day out. Takeovers. You've seen a tap takeover where a beer company will come in and take over all the taps at the bar with their products. What about an oyster takeover, where you can bring together the producers of your region or an out-of-market group of people to feature your product? There is strength in numbers. Getting together and collaborating is a huge key in creating that community. And branded gear. I know it seems cheesy, but when you walk into a bar, almost everything is branded. The cocktail shakers, the coasters, the bar maps, even the towels. They have spent millions of dollars doing market research. Learn from that. Don't go over the top, but what can you provide that's useful? Oyster knives, bandanas, oyster towels, things that look cool that chefs and cooks can use to further their support and love of your brand. And last but not least, social media. Y'all, it's time to have a come to Jesus talk. Social media is not going away. This is your new business card. If you cannot afford a website, social media is free and you need to invest in it. It tells anyone that wants to do business with you what you are and what you're about. Fortunately, you're using all the techniques that we just went over from a few slides ago to get out there. And those are the golden social media opportunities. The collaborations, the takeovers are natural social media opportunities, in addition to showing the world your family of supporters. You don't have to be a genius to put things out there. You don't have to have it look the flashiest. It needs to be the pictures of your employees, the chefs that support you, the restaurants, the customers who love your product, the people that support you and work hand in hand with you in communities. And never forget the repost button. It's super easy. People will tag you, and all you have to do is repost. So, in closing, the spirits world has been around for a long time, and it's the spirits brands that distinguish them from their competitors on the shelves of the bars and the liquor stores. And they use the same by using branding. Use the same techniques of the liquor brands that the liquor brands have been using for ages, and hopefully you can reap some of the same success. Hopefully you can apply these branding lessons and continue to build your family of oyster lovers. And that's all I got.
Thank you, Caroline. By the way, before I call for some questions, I also wanted to thank the Rosens because they were kind enough to bring some New Orleans king cake over. So if you can thank the Rosens for that. So do we have any questions for Caroline?
Pick one. Don't do Twitter. You're not going to do Twitter. No one here is doing Twitter. I mean, you have to choose, right? Like, I think that people, and there are some fantastic storytellers in here. I see Mr. Joe York, who probably knows way more about this than me. I see our wonderful friend in the back. So there are a ton of other people, but you got to keep it simple and manageable. You have a huge job to do. I would say look at Instagram or Facebook. It depends on what you want to do, but it's like a picture and a one sentence. Like, again, it's just getting it out there. I mean, you can do Twitter, but I'm just saying if you have to prioritize, if you want to show people what's happening in your community, you can. If Twitter is your love, then tweet away. But I'm just saying, don't feel like you have to do all of them, because you don't. What you need to do is, when Julia is about to go into guest shift, she's literally going to pull out her phone and type in your name, and either Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook, or your website will pull up. A website is static. You have to go in and update it. You can get a landing page with Squarespace, and it costs like $0, and it's really easy to do. And what I would do is I'd get a landing page with your social media things, because then you can also have a partner in your business help with it. I mean, you can go dive deeper into it and have a consistent voice, but that's not the point. The point is you just need to have something there. So when she's looking for you, or someone else is, they can see something. And again, it can be Twitter. Don't overwhelm yourself. Just choose one to start. Yeah, make it easy. People want to sell what y'all are like doing something that's so special, and you're putting your life's work into it. And there's a free way to get it out. And again, don't worry how it looks. People are going to think it's authentic. A very nice word that everyone uses now. If your pictures are kind of shitty, people are going to be like, oh my God, he's so busy with the oysters, turning them. He can't even take a good picture. And everyone would be like, those are the best oysters right there. Those are the best. Doesn't have time to do social media, but he's on it. He's doing it. He's doing it.
So one thing that I would say is I follow a lot of you on social media, and there's only so many pictures of a shucked oyster you can show. There's nothing wrong with that. Show your product. Show you. Yeah. Show your farm. Show your dog. Like, you want to be a story. I have looked at a lot of pretty oysters, like Julie and her. They're beautiful oysters. They start to blur over time to a lot of the people. Show yourself. Like, it drives me crazy when I never see the farmer. I'm like, where's the farmer?
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's true with the cocktail.
No, absolutely. I mean, looking at a drink is boring. It's actually, right now I'm working on putting, again, punch book together, because I love punch, and I'm like, I don't want pictures of just punches and punch bowls. I want pictures of people. I want pictures of like the things that happen around it. So, when you eat oysters, take a picture of that. Champagne, the chefs probably, listen, I love cocktails. I make a punch. I don't make cocktails great. But champagne's lovely, but think about like what's effervescence. Like right now, everyone is into an Aperol Spritz, right? It's like a little bit sweeter. It's like light and refreshing. Like, how would you want that? And you can even go to your local bartenders. Like, do you have someone that you trust in your life? And you're like, this is my oyster. What would taste good with it? Champagne's always great. You can pair anything with an oyster, though. Wine's great. I think it's just like figuring out what works for you in your area and then pushing that. Absinthe and oysters, not bad. Not bad at all. So it's not a direct answer, but you can really make anything taste good with it. So just so y'all know, he was talking about his friend's duck boats. Are we talking about duck boats? Great. Love duck boats. His friend's duck boat, the dog has become a part of the identity, and he wouldn't sell half of them without his dog. It's better than pictures of him and his wife and everything else, and dogs don't necessarily have to go with duck boats, but this one does, and it helps. It's just telling your story, being your brand, and y'all are all doing such wonderful work. And again, feel free to shoot me a note. I'm not an expert by any means, but I love what y'all do, and I hope we were able to inspire you a little bit today.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you. Thank you very much, Caroline.